to the afternoon keynote session on our first day of the conference. It's my great honor to introduce our next keynote speaker, Joan Lippincott. Joan is a librarian, having worked at 4 different academic libraries early in her career. However, her career took a new vector when she joined the Coalition for Network Information as Associate Executive Director. She served in this role for 30 years before retiring in 2020. In her role at CNI, Joan provided leadership for its programs in teaching and learning, learning spaces, digital scholarship, and assessment. She also served on the advisory boards of the Learning Spaces Collaboratory and the Learning Space Toolkit project. In addition to serving as a consultant to many academic libraries for their space renovation projects, she has been on the planning committee for the Designing Libraries for the 21st Century Conference since its inception. She served on the board of the New Media Consortium, as well as its advisory boards for the Horizon Report for Higher Education and Libraries. Joan was the editor of the EDUCAUSE Review e-content portal and the board of the Network Digital Library of Theses and Dissertations. She is past chair of the Association of College and Research Libraries New Publications Board and served as a member of the ACRL task force that produced the framework for information literacy in higher education. Joan has continued to engage in speaking, writing, program planning, and advising in all these areas since her retirement. She is, so it's hard to say that it's a retirement. She is currently co-editor of a book that gathers some of the best insights from the Designing Libraries Conference over the years. Joan has a tremendous gift for identifying trends across diverse institutions, and we are thrilled she will speak to the issues university libraries are addressing as we move from the pandemic experience and transform our learning spaces and space planning programs and other programs. Please join me in welcoming Joan Lippincott.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Chuck. I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about transforming university libraries. And in preparing for this presentation, I thought, should I be giving some type of land acknowledgement? And we heard Chuck start the conference with that, and our Canadian colleagues in Toronto presented one. And I really wasn't sure that was, for me, quite maybe the appropriate thing, since I don't live here. This is not my institution. And I was trying to decide what might be appropriate. And this is what I thought of. A number of years ago, I saw this map, which is a digital humanities project produced by a University of Georgia historian. And he developed this map to be published in conjunction with a print book, or perhaps it's also an online book that he authored. And the map is called Invasion of America. And it really was the title that grabbed my attention and made me click on the link and say, I'm a history student. Invasion of America. When did that, what happened? What did I miss? And what I saw was this map, and at the bottom, you'll see that there's a cursor you can move along a timeline. And this particular representation is from 1818 to 1821 in what was then the United States of America, but it goes back to colonial times, and it shows the arrival of white Western Europeans taking over the Native American land in the colonies and then what became the United States. It is a really moving and graphic presentation of that data. And while the historian produced this as part of his research, it's a tremendous, in my view, teaching tool from elementary school through higher education. And for me, this represents transformation of scholarship and can be transformation of teaching and learning, because it makes us look at something in a different way. For me, it has much more impact than reading text, which was part of my education. I knew that Europeans and British colonists took over Native American lands. Of course, I knew about this. It's part of US history. But this made me feel it and see it in a much more almost overwhelming way. I would also comment that the title of this map, Invasion of America, was also transformative in my own thinking of what that meant and how we perceive it, and that this part of US history. And I think it relates very closely to the presentation that we heard earlier today about changing the language and how libraries, many libraries, are working hard to change the language in metadata and descriptions of content in their collections, general collections and special collections. So this to me is a transformative way that libraries can develop and can disseminate content. So I do think of transforming libraries in a very broad way. And I saw this statement from the strategic plan of the University of Pennsylvania Libraries recently. And they say they aim to pioneer change rather than merely manage it. That's transformative. But the second piece that I think is so important is that they say that their strategic plan seamlessly connects the library's digital services and systems with the university's research, teaching, and learning mission. In other words, they're not doing this in a vacuum. They're not doing this because they're interested in certain things or they think certain things are the best direction. They're doing it in concert with their university's mission. Similarly, at North Carolina State University, they state the libraries are a gateway to knowledge. Well, we're all familiar with that, but they go on to say they define the leading edge of information services and collections. So they don't just go along with what is the average or what is the kind of common way people do things. They want to define the leading edge and transform the library. But again, like the University of Pennsylvania, they say they do it to support the university's mission. So I think those two pieces of transforming libraries are both very important. And my talk today is going to cover these areas. It's a lot to cover in a relatively short time, so I'll be going through this very quickly and we'll be happy to elaborate on any of the issues in the Q&A. I'm going to try very hard to leave time for the Q&A, and I can elaborate or I'll try to address things that aren't in the presentation as well. So by programs, I'm talking about new initiatives, you may call them services, some are collaborations, and then the staffing to support those kinds of programs, the physical spaces in which some of these programs take place, and the increased emphasis on developing community in academic libraries. So where do you start? How do you know what it is that your university needs in terms of transforming your institutional library? Well, University of Calgary, my colleague, Tom Hickerson, who was the former vice provost of libraries at Calgary, came to that institution from Cornell and was fairly new at the institution, was talking to one of the academic administrators there and was trying to do his own, in effect, marketing of the library services and telling him about the collections and all the kinds of reference services and instruction and consultations and various things that the library offered. And the administrator stared at him for a moment and then said in a very polite way, "But we don't do research like that anymore." And it really took Tom aback. He was really startled that all of these things that libraries have been doing traditionally didn't seem important to this academic administrator. And so ultimately he applied for a grant from the Mellon Foundation and received it and used it to fund a small number of faculty to work on their research initiatives, cross-disciplinary initiatives with people from the library staff. And they formed teams and they worked on these research projects that were the content areas of the faculty members. And they've produced reports and articles. I have the citation to the article in the CNRL, College and Research Libraries, at the bottom. So I have many links in my presentation. When you see the slides, you can go to the sources easily. And these are the items that they found were very important to this set of researchers at that university. And what I would suggest is this is not kind of the Bible of what your library should offer. These were relevant for that university, and it's important to understand what's relevant at your own institution. For example, this was fairly new on my radar recently. I did not know that many libraries are starting to have some of their staff be team members when faculty prepare systematic reviews for publication. And there's a really interesting program that's a joint initiative of the University of Minnesota, Cornell, and Carnegie Mellon. They have some great materials that are available on the website about these kinds of activities in academic libraries. And one of the content includes some video clips from interviews with faculty members about working with librarians on production of a systematic review in their content areas. And the faculty extolled the librarians' methodology. It helped create order out of sometimes chaos for them. They thought their project management skills were outstanding, much better than many of them had. And importantly, the librarians could work across disciplines. So one social scientist said, I know the literature very well in my particular subspecialty, but most social science research these days is interdisciplinary, and I do not know the literature in those other fields. And the librarians were able to connect me deeply with the literature, and it added immeasurably to the quality and the range of the systematic review. Another thing that I've seen academic libraries getting into fairly recently, and maybe some have been doing it for a longer time, are participating in research sprints. And these are with faculty. This particular one is at University of Virginia, and it's taking place this summer. They have maybe 5 or 6 faculty. Often these are competitive processes where faculty will submit what they would like to work with the library on, and a certain number are chosen, and then they're matched with a team. Usually these are time limited. I think this one may extend for multiple weeks over the summer. Some research sprints are 1 week or perhaps even a few days. And in this case, this one that I singled out was for a faculty member in the School of Architecture, and the library team assigned including the subject specialist in architecture, the librarian for the humanities, and the director of information policy for the library. And the description says that this not only helps the faculty member, but it's a way that the librarian team members are learning new skills and are getting much deeper understanding of the research being done at their institution. Another type of program, and this is an older one that gave a session at a CNI meeting, was done at American University. Many grants, at least in the US, whether they're public or private funders, have a stipulation that the researcher have some way of disseminating the results in language and in venues that are understandable to the general public. These could be videos, they could be articles in more publications that the general public would read. It could be interviews, all kinds of things. And this one-day workshop that was planned and hosted by the library focused on, I quote, the significant and changing role of the scholar as policy influencer and public intellectual, meaning in the community, they were helping the public recognize the expertise, but in a way that the public could understand. They had 100 faculty attend. They had never had anywhere near that kind of attendance for any workshop hosted by the library. This program is a little more typical, but I think it's a particularly good one. It's run by the Digital Scholarship Center at the University of Rochester, a 2-day faculty workshop. You might ask, how do they do these things? Think, all of these workshops are done during breaks, vacation times, or summer, when faculty could attend for a full 2 days in this case. And again, faculty propose something that they would like to work on during these 2 days. In this case, it would be an assignment where students will use digital tools in one of the assignments for their coursework. They might use GIS to develop a map. They may use data visualization tools. They may use something more simple like a timeline or develop a podcast. And the librarian who runs this program says, part of her hidden agenda is she wants to teach the faculty how they can work with librarians from the conceptualization of an assignment through its delivery and even its assessment. So rather than have the students turn loose on the library trying to complete an assignment that may actually be well beyond their capabilities or the time frame allowed, she works with them to help develop something that's a very reasonable and that has a good outcome for the students. A side benefit of this program for her has been that while this is aimed at coursework and teaching and learning, it's led some of the faculty to come back for consultations with her on their research, not just on their teaching. Why does this happen? Because all of a sudden the faculty understand the deep expertise that some of the library staff have to assist them in the areas in which they need some help or some collaboration. So there are lots and lots of more programs and topics that I could address. Some have already been addressed in this conference, and others may be addressed in future days. And again, I'd be willing to make some comments on those in the Q&A if you would like. But how do we scale up these programs? I mean, this requires a lot of staff investment in some cases. Well, at University of Arizona, they were able to get a grant also from the Mellon Foundation to try to implement some of the kinds of methodologies that were used at Calgary to understand in a deeper way the faculty research needs. In their case, they put out, in a sense, again, a competition for faculty to apply for their small grants from the library, but using the Mellon funds to work with people in the library, with library staff, to develop research projects on digital borderlands or on the borderlands between the US and Mexico. And this is a very interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary field. And so they got proposals from a wide variety of departments. The goal, as I mentioned, was so that the library and librarians could understand better the whole research process of some of the faculty so that they could engage and provide consultation or engagement in all of those areas. But Sean Sutton, the Dean of the library, also had the goal of understanding or beginning to understand how to develop, quote, a strategic balance between the consultative roles, which are usually intermittent, say maybe a 1-hour consultation at the beginning of the project, and maybe another one, months or even a year later, and maybe some results, another consultation for an hour on publication outlets or things like that, which I'm not saying that that's of lesser value. It's of extremely important value, but libraries have to balance how they'll deliver services, in some cases in these limited consultations, and in others in this deep integration into the research workflows. And again, this is a benefit to the library staff in better understanding the research needs of their very important constituency, as well as a venue in which to both develop skills and demonstrate their expertise to the faculty at their institution. And I do think that establishing credibility by the library in these transformative program areas is something that is not something we could take for granted. Many faculty question, why would the library be involved with data visualization? Why is the library involved with research workflows or data management? Some academic administrators have the same questions. I heard of a provost recently asking a dean of libraries, why is the library involved in research at all? It's shocking, but true. And additionally, there are library staff who question why the library is involved in these programs. And in order to establish these new areas, I think outreach, marketing, and visibility are extremely important. So number one, I ask all of you to, even while you're here or when you're back home, take a hard look at your own library websites. How well do you advertise your technology programs and services? Do you do something like San Diego State University, where you show a photo of your digital scholarship space, where you list and name the kinds of technologies you have available or for loan, where you have a great calendar of events, and where you specify what staff are available to work with your user community? Or on the right at University of Miami libraries, I particularly like personally, this is my own taste, when libraries feature the specific staff that can assist with particular programs. For example, this one is on spatial analysis. In other words, many faculty don't know the library has someone who specializes in spatial analysis. Here it is, right here. Tells the individual's qualifications, the types of thing he works on, his name, his contact information, his photo. This is outreach. This is a personal statement to your user community of the skill set of your staff. Do you advertise your workshops in eye-catching ways? Can you get this kind of information out not only on your own website or listservs, but maybe even into screens around the university in academic departments or buildings where more people will see them without having to come into the library to see that at Florida International, they're doing a workshop on finding and preparing data sets for analysis. And at Princeton, they're doing one on getting started with ORCID and another ID researcher service. This again advertises libraries have the skill sets to help researchers, whether faculty or graduate students, with these kinds of needs, or even undergraduate students in some cases. And so we need to get this message out. But you need to have the staff who actually can deliver on these programs and initiatives. And there are, from what I hear from many libraries, significant staffing challenges, hiring and retraining and retaining staff with the skills needed, retraining existing staff, cooperation, communication between staff with the high-level technology skills and other staff, and developing campus partnerships. So in terms of hiring and retaining staff, what kinds of degrees and experience are you requiring? What's realistic and what's really valuable in your institution? Do your librarians resent your hiring people without a library and information science degree? And how do you handle that? How can you be competitive and offer a good salary to people with high-level technology skills when you may be in a geographic area that offers great employment, or as a result of the pandemic, where more and more people, companies will allow remote work, it's even increasing that competitiveness. Even on your own campus, you're competing with a campus IT department, which may be able to offer better salaries than the library. One of the issues for me when I visited digital scholarship labs or centers, which is a particular interest of mine, is noticing that sometimes there is staff that have PhD, which I have, so I don't have a resentment towards PhDs, but some PhDs who seem to have taken the job in the digital scholarship lab in the expectation that they'll be able to then produce that book out of their dissertation or that digital project, or spend a good piece of their time doing their own work that interests them. And in some digital scholarship labs in libraries, that may be appropriate. But if the library is intending to reach a wide audience and offer lots of programs and work with lots of different faculty and graduate students and undergraduates, that takes a lot of time. And so having someone who wants to spend more time on his or her own research can create problems, in my view. And you also need someone or some people who really understand how to work in teams, because digital scholarship is done in teams, teams of people with different skill sets, and individuals have to honor and value the skill sets of the other participants in the team. For existing staff, it takes a lot of resource in order to retrain people. This report by the University of Manitoba Libraries says that the skills training and librarian expertise has increased incrementally while they're working on research data management, digitization, and research impact. And it's not a one-time event, nor is it a one-time cost. So if your expectations are for your existing staff to develop these skills, you have to give them the resources, including the time, to develop those skills. I've also seen a lot of silo development in libraries where the subject specialists don't work with the digital scholarship lab and the special collections people don't work with either the instruction librarians or the subject specialists. There's so many types of specialized people in libraries, like metadata librarians and GIS staff, that can work on these digital projects. And there's got to be some attention taken to a process for bringing people together in teams, which is what those projects at Calgary and at Arizona and here at University of Miami, which also has a similar grant, have been working on. I initially heard of a good model at Purdue University some years ago. Purdue was one of the earlier university libraries working on research data management. And what they did was send out a team of someone with high-level technology skills and a subject specialist to interview faculty in their labs or offices and ask them about the kind of data they were using in their own research. So putting together those teams. Similarly, at the University of Southern California, there's one librarian who specializes in systematic reviews. And in a webinar, she said that when she gets a new request to work on a systematic review, she always brings in the subject specialist, and they work together as long as the subject specialist is willing. And her goal is that by the end of the process of doing one of these with a faculty member, the subject specialist will be able to handle it on his or her own as others come up within her areas of specialization. Another way that staff develop skills is often during the summer to work as a team to develop a digital project, say maybe using digitized special collections from their own university library to develop some digital skills. Campus partnerships are also very important. And there are a number of great examples like this one at Columbia, which brings together the graduate school, campus IT, office research, and the libraries to put together a set of opportunities for graduate students and postdocs to get more data-intensive and research data-intensive skills. Or one at the University of Colorado Boulder that relates to Cliff's talk about what do you do with some of these projects or research initiatives by faculty that are working with really big data that's beyond the scope of what the campus repository can handle. And they've been working on it there with a partnership between the library and research computing and others. Or at the University of Pittsburgh, they have a collaboration between the University Center for Teaching and Learning and the University Library to develop what they call an open lab, which is for hands-on making and experiential learning. An interesting presentation by librarians at McGill and University of Saskatchewan talked about librarian involvement in entrepreneurship competitions on campuses. And one of the recommendations was that libraries partner with technology transfer offices to get more embedded into these competitions, which are extremely important to students. And so here, what I'm trying to illustrate is that different campuses will have different strengths, different priorities, and different needs. But there are all kinds of interesting programs that you can develop if you have the right staff and the right skills. Some of these programs take place in physical spaces. We know after, I can't say unfortunately after the pandemic, as a result of the pandemic, that the relationship between physical and virtual spaces has become much more important. And that the virtual programs, the specialized workshops or even basic workshops that were developed by libraries online expanded the reach of most libraries tremendously, especially among graduate student participation. And I think that that will continue. It doesn't negate the need for in-person workshops, but it expands the audience. And I also think that the tutorials that many libraries developed during the pandemic, of course, many had tutorials before that, but ideally they will free up time for librarians to spend more of their time on in-depth consultations with their constituencies and leave some of the basic things to things like tutorials. I believe strongly that physical space will continue to be important in libraries. I think like the new Studio X, which just opened a few months ago, which focuses on virtual reality, augmented reality, and extended reality at University of Rochester. You just could not do these things in the same way if you didn't have physical space. That may change in the future. All of these high-tech spaces are built to change, including the Data Experience Lab at the North Carolina State University, which is the hub for data science, visualization, and digital research and scholarship. So one of the things that they say in their description of this space is that it offers collaboration space, the computing resources, but also the staff expertise. This is one of the things that often defines libraries' spaces different from other high-tech spaces on campus. And at the end of this description, they say, we'd love for you to be part of our community. And actually, in the very first workshop that C&I did on digital scholarship centers, one of the outcomes of that was that every single person who participated, who had a fledgling digital scholarship center or lab, said that physical space was, in their view, the most important thing for establishing a community of people working on digital projects at their college or university. At University of Notre Dame, they have a week-long thesis and dissertation camp, boot camp. Probably some of you offer things like this, but again, the physical space is important. The library and writing center and other expertise are available, but it allows the graduate students to work in ways that they want to work in a physical environment. And one of their goals is to form ongoing communities of practice, this emphasis on community. Physical space can signal diversity, equity, and inclusion, and be a way to welcome many types of students, faculty, and community members into the library. On the left, we see a pride display, very simple to do at the University of Houston Library, and on the right, an exhibit, which I believe is both virtual and in person at Georgia Tech, celebrating 60 years of Black excellence at Georgia Tech. At Wayne State University in the city of Detroit, They have an art exhibit called Eyes on Detroit opening this week. And they describe it as reflecting the rich diversity of our student population and community, the Detroit community as a whole. This exhibit, the paintings that are throughout the library, not only create welcoming spaces for study and gathering, but they also inspire innovation and teach students about the richness of all cultures through art. You know, what a wonderful statement about the use and benefit and value of physical spaces in libraries. So I've covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. And in order to establish some new kinds of transformative programs or build on the transformative programs you already have at your library, I think a lot of assessment is needed. Assessing segments of your population. You don't have a generic population, you have segments. Even within large segments like undergraduates, you still have the physical science students, the business students, the humanities students. They have different needs in many cases. Assessing your staff capabilities, the facilities and technologies you have and need, and then also understanding the landscape, at least on your own campus, what's already available, whether you can partner, whether you can benefit, whether you want to duplicate or whether you shouldn't duplicate what already exists. And I'm going to end with two slides that I've used many times in presentations because I want to drive home the idea that while you are transforming the library, you're staying true to the mission of the library in the higher education institution. Libraries have always had the mission to support research and scholarship. They should also be supporting e-research and digital scholarship. They've had a leveling influence, the access to all, this equality focus of libraries. And one of the ways that we're doing that now is by bringing expensive technologies for use by all campus departments. And importantly, as I mentioned earlier, libraries are often the place on campus that offer the expertise, usually free of charge, to the user community, which is generally not the practice in many other units of the university. And they can support undergraduate and graduate students both independently through workshops and consultations and coursework. The values remain the same. We just transform the ways we instantiate those values to support the three-sided mission of the university in research, teaching and learning, and community service, as well as supporting the societal values that libraries have always held dear, the access to information, the stewardship and celebration of cultural heritage, and the fostering of community, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think I left some time for questions, and thank you very much. I'll be very disappointed if I don't get any questions. Would you like me to elaborate? The other thing that I'd welcome you to do is if you're doing some interesting programs at your university and you're not going to give a session on it at this conference, I'd love to hear about them. And you can either come up to the microphone or if you'd like, you can email me at joan@cni.org. Thank you.
I don't want you to be disappointed because I was thoroughly impressed by your talk. In particular, what resonated for me were your comments about what we can do as a research data management community in elevating or marketing and outreach and things of that nature. One of the things I've observed as a new member of this community is there continue to be traditional perspectives of what a library is. Yes. And in fact, it's actually an IT shop in many respects. There's so much technology, so much knowledge. I think of research data management professionals as research scientists and information scientists. But if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little more about what we could do collectively, given that we're at IAUTL, and how we could come together to do that outreach and marketing.
Well, I have not thought about it, doing it collectively. So let me see if I can come up with some ideas on that. Maybe while I'm thinking of that in the back of my head, I will say that one of the things that I think can be very effective is if a symposium is organized in the library that brings in scholars from other institutions, especially to talk about how they partnered with librarians on development of digital research. So that could also be a webinar series developed by this organization that could be international in focusing on those programs. I also wanted to mention that if any of you are renovating your library and want to put in some high-tech facilities and your administration is looking at you like, why in the world would we want to spend money on that? I think that from what I've heard from many institutions is that site visits to libraries that have actually done this and meetings with, again, if they meet with the provost or some faculty members who are doing interesting projects in that university, if they actually see it, then it has much more impact than just talking about it. And I'm going to add one more comment, and that is on assessment. This is something that I feel strongly about, that there's a lot of needs assessment that goes on in preparation for renovating facilities and building new buildings. But a lot of it is about what students like. Well, I'll tell you what they like. They like a lot of natural light, which in a renovation may or may not be possible. Lots of light is possible, but maybe not natural light. They want outlets and good Wi-Fi everywhere, and they need it. And they want a mix of collaborative and silent spaces. But I have seen probably hundreds of needs assessments that come up with these same points. So let's go deeper. Let's talk to faculty about what kinds of teaching and learning projects they would like to do in their coursework if there were support from the library. Just something so simple. I was once asked to do a focus group for faculty at a small liberal arts college. And I started out with some high-tech examples of digital projects first to get the faculty's attention about this is about academic work, not fun with technology, and then some facilities. And in the Q&A, professor of German said, I do a course about German news, what's in the news in Germany, and the students are asked to watch television programs in German and read German newspapers, that kind of thing. She said, they then do a paper or talk or something. She said, but since it's about media, I'd really like them to do a podcast, but I don't know how to do a podcast. Do you mean the library could help me with that? So again, this marketing of expertise. If they don't hear about it and see it and think about it in a new way, she didn't ask her local people, could you help me with a podcast? It was opening her eyes to something different that's very easy to solve in that case. So that was a very long answer. Chuck, please.
Oh, thanks very much, Joan. That was really, really a terrific presentation. And don't take it personally about the lack of virtual input. I have a suspicion that it's about the Eastern Hemisphere and the workday and the time. We had a lot of engagement from the Eastern Hemisphere earlier today. My question for you is also it's kind of a hunch. Do you have a hunch about, you didn't talk about it explicitly, but what is the impact of the experience of pandemic and dislocation of library services and programs in the future, thinking about how space relates to all the kinds of services that you described and the institution's values moving forward? I know it's really difficult to answer, but do you have any hunches?
I would call them views. Maybe they're hunches. And I also realize they may be very wrong, or they may not apply to all institutions. I do believe very strongly in the value of physical space in libraries, and I think it's going to be extremely important for deans of libraries to be able to make that case. as the pandemic progressed and I saw all of these shutdowns and the libraries removing furniture so students could sit at tables 6 feet apart, believe me, 100%, you see me wearing a mask. I'm very careful of what I do during this time period. So I understood the reason for it, but I thought, here go 2 decades of progress in library spaces. You know, this is like horrifying to me to see this happen. And particularly things like the digital scholarship labs closing and only a certain number of things they could do virtually without people having direct access to equipment. So I really think that these high-tech spaces will continue to have importance in libraries that are able to garner the appropriate technology and expertise and do the right kind of outreach. When I say right kind, the kind that's appropriate to their institution, to directly work with faculty, whether it's on their research or in their teaching and learning initiatives. But they've got to demonstrate it. They've got to make the case. And I think that this will perhaps be a little bit harder. I hope that some libraries are collecting statistics on students coming back into the facility. I've seen some data that demonstrates that they are coming back in droves, and other libraries saying they're not. I don't understand the reasons for that, and it would be really useful for the libraries on both ends of the spectrum to try to interview students, not just get the statistics. The other thing that I would love to see is some simple ways of qualitative data collection. Just put up a whiteboard and say, what did you miss about the library during the pandemic? Get their comments on what they missed. I also think that many campuses are in a new era of focusing on matters of belonging that often aligns with diversity, equity, and inclusion measures, but not exactly. They're not separate issues, they're overlapping issues. And the belonging piece is extremely important in my view for students' mental health, which we know suffered during the pandemic, you know, throughout, at least in the US. There are studies that have collected data on that. And one of the things was this loss of sense of community. And yes, you can create community online. I think it's much, much harder. And in my own experience, working with international groups, it worked when we all knew each other through physical interactions and then moved online. That worked really well. But to get to know people from scratch only in the virtual environment, I think much, much harder. Not for everyone. Some people do better. And I do recognize that. Some people with issues, a colleague of mine that I know through another organization told me that his child with learning difficulties and was somewhere on the spectrum was doing much, much better online, would actually ask questions of other students, which he never did in the physical classroom. So there are all kinds, it isn't a one size fits all, but I believe for most, especially undergraduate students, having this sense of belonging in the campus community is extremely important, and the library can play a really, really important role. And they need to package that message so that the university administration can see the role that the library is playing in that arena.
Thanks, Joan. It was a great presentation. This is a little bit of a follow-up to Chuck's question, and it's whether you have any hunches about the future of staff space. because of course, the pandemic has had its own impact on our workforce. They're starting to come back. Some of them are quite concerned. I recall something I think that Clifford said this morning about be careful that you don't move too quickly and make changes before we actually have some of the data. But I know that we're experimenting in many of our institutions around the future of workspace. So I don't know whether you have any hunches there.
Again, I don't know if I'd call them hunches. I've done a lot of thinking about it. And I do believe that there will be more flexibility in what staff are offered. Now, maybe that will change if the labor market isn't as tight as it is now. Right now, a lot of employers are having trouble recruiting and hiring staff. And I know of one organization, not a library, but it was actually a lab, a scientific lab, not at a university, where it was like a revolving door. People being hired, coming in, working a few weeks and say, I just got a better offer, I'm out. And so I think that can take place in some segments of the library profession. So I think that part of retaining, especially technology staff who are maybe hard to retain, may be offering them the option for all or partly virtual work. What I would caution about is particularly onboarding. How do you develop a team? How do you learn the organizational culture? As libraries hire more and more people, which I'm in favor of. I did this at Cornell in the 1980s. We hired a PhD statistician in the library because a big segment of our users in that library were using census data. So we hired someone who could work with statistics on the computer. It was a new thing. Census was coming out in tapes. So how do you, especially with people who don't have any grounding in the values of the library and the expectations, get enveloped and into that culture and start to own the principles and the vision and the values that are owned by libraries? Now, I'm not saying they have to kind of sign the pledge that they're going to abide by every library value. Ideally, they'll help change and advance library values, but they do need to understand the fundamentals. And I think that's extremely difficult to do without being on site and working informally with colleagues. So I think it will be a blend. I do think there will be less space. Now, can I go on for a minute? I think the other question is open offices, right? And I'm someone who has a strong opinion on it because I need quiet to do serious work. If I've got to write a report, I had at my DuPont Circle office at CNI, which was inside, should have been the quietest place in the city, a metro station across the street with a revolving cast of characters of street musicians. And the building was old enough, it was kind of a modern building, but the window glass was such that it actually amplified the sound. It was louder in my office than it was on the street. So if I had to get a deadline for an article or a report or something, I worked from home. And I had that luxury, both, because I could set, I could make my own decision on that, but because my home is quiet, and we know not everyone has that. So that's another issue with this whole working virtually. It actually annoys me that some people think that all of these younger people have a good space to work in their apartment or their house with their 6 young siblings. That's, to me, a very privileged viewpoint to think that everybody's got a good workspace at home. And not everyone does. We can't expect that of everyone. They also don't have all the technology. What happens, and I know of a case where all of a sudden the router went out in someone's home during the pandemic, I know of a case. This must have happened, what, tens of thousands of times, right? The router had to be replaced. If this person had been in her office, oh, there's a tech staff, come in, take care of it. Instead, she was left to figure this out and buy the equipment and figure it out herself. And it was early in the pandemic when people weren't going into homes to repair things. So I just think that it's too simplistic to think that we're all going to go to remote work. I believe there's a great value to in-person work. It just doesn't need to be as 5 days a week throughout the year as maybe it's been in most libraries. So that's a strong opinion. And if you'd like to counter it, I really, not just you, Vivian, but anyone here, I'd love to hear your views on where you think things are going.
Joan, I think I have a quick question,
Yeah.
hopefully, but thank you so much for your presentation and reflections. I know many of us have heard little sort of whispers of an upcoming conference that would build on a lot of the themes you've mentioned today, the Designing Libraries Conference. And I just wondered if you might be willing to say a few words about that.
Thank you, Kelly. There will be a 9th Designing Libraries for the 21st Century Conference. It will take place at Temple University in the brand new Charles Library designed by Snøhetta. And it will take place in the first week in November. The announcement is going out today and tomorrow. We'll have an announcement on CNI Announce. The registration is not yet available, but you can sign up to get messages so that you'll learn, as soon as registration is open, you will hear about that. In addition, I'll mention that Kelly is a co-author of a chapter in the Designing Libraries for the 21st Century book, which should come out from our publisher, ACRL, in the fall. And one of the things we, the 3 co-editors, looked for in a publisher was that there would be an open access edition of that book. So it will be available to all of you.
Thank you very much, Joan. That was terrific. You managed to touch on 3 of our 4 conference tracks. So kudos to you. And we're very appreciative. Can we have a round of applause for
Thank you so much.